Good morning, and thank you for coming to our presentation. Today, Sherry Taylor and I will be talking about the collaboration we have had between Harper College and NIU since 2005. This presentation has been pre-recorded. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat area while it's running. There will also be time at the conclusion of our presentation for a live Q&A session. In our presentation, we will start at a high level talking about the purpose of an environmental scan at Harper College and how we have used it. I will conclude my section with an introduction to the companion dashboard that has been created to supplement the environmental scan document. Sherry then will spend some time detailing typical data sources. At Harper College, the environmental scan is designed to provide a baseline of information about the communities that make up the college district. The vast majority of the information is derived from public data sources. Prior to 2005, the compilation of these data was largely done by the Institutional Research Office. By partnering with NIU, we have freed up a ton of time that can be spent on other projects. The scan itself has evolved over time to its present form that has 6 primary areas of focus. The bulk of the scan is about the people who either live or work within the district, and the balance of the report is about the businesses. The sections about the people who live and work in our district are discussed along 4 lines. The demographics section portrays some of the changes within the district and begins to explain why they are important for us to monitor. Within this section, any changes to general population, including changes to the race-ethnicity composition in the area, are discussed. Additional demographic topics include information about languages spoken and the country of origin for foreign-born residents. Within this section, we also look at changes in age composition and levels of educational attainment. In our last scan, we were able to conclude that our community size has remained largely the same, but our residential population is becoming older, more educated, and more diverse. Specifically, the area is becoming more racially and ethnically mixed as the white population shrinks and is replaced by Asian, Latinx, and other races. The current population is more linguistically diverse, speaking a wider range of primary and secondary languages. The economics section describes the financial impacts on the people who live in the district. In particular, there is information about trends in gasoline prices, Illinois pensions, taxation, and inflation, all things that can impact our residents' financial well-being. In addition, this section reviews trends in higher education enrollment and higher education funding, both of which impact the ability for our residents to pursue education beyond high school. From these data, we were able to begin to understand the financial challenges our residents are dealing with now and into the future. The Sender District Performance section provides comparison data for our 3 high school districts compared to statewide information along a variety of metrics such as enrollment, student demographics, attendance, dropout rates, mobility, and graduation rates. In addition, there is information about changes in the percentage of students on free and reduced lunch, educational financial assistance, and college readiness. From these data, we saw that just like the general population, our schools are diversifying. We also saw an increase in the percentage of students in free and reduced lunch programs. The final section about people in our district is the housing trends section. It's the most concise, only 7 pages. Within this section, information about foreclosures, occupancy, and housing values are described. I will reference the utility of this section a little later in the presentation. The sections about area business focuses on 2 general categories. The information in meeting the needs of business and industry centers around detailing employment and labor force participation, industry trends, and commuter patterns. Occupations and industries with high numbers of openings are also identified. Some of what we learned is that we have almost as many people commuting into our district as we have commuting out. We also learned that the economic recovery in Illinois has been relatively weak when compared to the rest of the nation. Of course, much of this will need to be re-examined given our current situation. The final section, Workforce Trends, looks at occupation and wage growth, how the workforce is aging, and the necessary hourly wage to sustain a family. The main conclusions drawn from this section is that the Harper District, along with the state of Illinois, is still experiencing slower job growth in relation to neighboring states and the nation. The environmental scan provides insight on many indicators and trends in the areas of demographics, economics, K-12 sender districts, housing, and workforce. Having knowledge of what the future changes or lack of change may take place helps to inform decision-making processes. Bottom line, the purpose of the environmental scan is to identify the trends and drivers of change that will shape the Harper landscape in the next 3 to 5 years. Essentially, the scan helps us tell a story about the Harper District. To ensure we always have the information we need on hand, Harper conducts a scan every 3 to 5 years. The ways in which the environmental scan has been used at Harper has evolved over time. During the past 2 strategic planning cycles, the environmental scan has been one of the primary documents we have used when developing our SWOT analysis. The O and the T portion of a SWOT are all about the opportunities and threats in the external environment. Having a document that helps our leadership understand the current operating environment and future trends at the local, state, national, and global levels has been the perfect starting point for those discussions. As part of the strategic planning process, stakeholders select strategic goals for the 5-year plan and then set targets. Whenever possible, these targets are aligned with replicable benchmarks that can be used to measure progress. The environmental scan helps us identify some of those benchmarks that we use, especially for those opportunities and threats. The environmental scan has also become a good resource for our annual operational plan. Traditionally, it has been used by enrollment services as a source document when developing enrollment targets. In addition, they have spearheaded a number of new initiatives in response to our changing demographics. For example, many of our web pages can be viewed in languages other than English. More recently, it has been used by community relations to help identify community needs and to determine directions for developing community partners. Finally, we use the information about housing occupancy to make a change on who in the community to survey when assessing the awareness of and satisfaction with Harper's programming. The housing data indicated that the number of renters in our community was growing and was likely to continue to grow. Based on this information, we shifted from just surveying property taxpayers, that is homeowners, to include renters in the survey sample. Although not related to strategic or operational planning, a new use for the environmental scan has come to light fairly recently. Within the past 18 months or so, we have gained a new president, provost, and CFO. The environmental scan has been instrumental in helping them better understand the community in which they find themselves. The environmental scan report is typically close to 100 pages, and while all of that information is needed to provide a clear picture of the Harper District, it is a bit overwhelming for most. To overcome this challenge, the folks at NIU developed a companion dashboard in 2014. The dashboard is limited to a few key metrics, and each time we conduct a new scan, the dashboard is reviewed and updated. It's divided into 3 sections: resident demographics, sender demographics, worker demographics. What's really innovative about the dashboard is the ability to drill down to each of the 3 high school districts. For the next few slides, I'll provide a quick virtual tour of the dashboard features. In the resident demographic space, the metrics we focused on for the population by age and gender, educational attainment for adults, unemployment rates, changes in race ethnicity, and median household income. When we drill down into one of the districts, these metrics change slightly to look at things like household size, the top 10 industries for that area, and resident worker educational attainment. Looking at the sender demographics, we focus more on those metrics that are particular to our high schools. Things like the percent of seniors who have started or completed a FAFSA, changes in the free and reduced lunch eligibility over a 10-year span, and change in enrollment by race ethnicity. Clicking into one of the districts, the metrics again change slightly. We are still looking at FAFSA completion, but this time it's by high school. At this level, we also focus on performance metrics. The last dashboard, Worker Demographics, highlights aspects about working in the Harper District, such as commuter patterns and the top 10 industries that are growing or declining. This particular part of the dashboard is limited to the Harper District as a whole. This has everything to do with the data, which you will hear about next as Sherry digs into the details about the data used in the scan and the dashboard.
All right, thanks, Kathy. I'm going to talk a little bit about the data. Anybody that knows me knows that that's my life, is working with all kinds of data. So these are the different topics that we actually include within most of the environmental scans. So population trends is important to keep a bead on because, as we know, Illinois is losing population. So how is that impacting your local region? Workforce trends, very important now with COVID, with so many people being unemployed. How is that impacting your district? The economic picture beyond just the local area. State and federal economic changes definitely impact us at the local level. So I try to take a look at all that as to what's taking place. Housing trends. How are people able to afford their homes? What about foreclosures? That was big back in 2008, but it seems like it's coming back again with COVID. Technology evolution. We don't delve into this real deep, but we do touch upon, some areas that are taking place at the national level that they can see as regular trends, or perhaps new ways of delivering coursework, which is important now with so many going back and forth between in-person and online. Political environment, always important because it definitely impacts everybody at the local level. So that, there's some state and federal stuff that you might want to look at there too. Post-secondary performance, always important to know who it is that could be coming into your institution. So there's an awful lot of indicators that you can include there. And then meeting the needs of business and industry, what's taking place with commuters, and I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit further later on. But what's happening with establishments? With so many people being unemployed, do you have an awful lot more entrepreneurial kind of activity taking place in your region? Good things to know. The first data resource we're going to talk about is the Census Bureau. Currently, I'm the interim lead for the State Data Center Network, which is actually a partnership with the Census Bureau. So if you ever need any assistance with accessing or interpreting any of the data on their site, just give me a call and I can help you out with that. So the American Community Survey is really what everybody is most familiar with, and it was born in about 2005 as a result of them removing what was called the long form off the decennial census. If you saw the form for the 2020 that just ended, that's called the short form, and it only asks a few questions, which is basically your age, your race, your ethnicity, sex, whether you rent or own. It's very quick to fill out that form. But there was a second form that was sent out to about 1 in 6 households throughout the country, and that asked all the interesting questions about income, education attainment, disabilities, all that kind of stuff that we all need. And so people didn't want to answer those questions anymore. They complained to the legislature that it was actually too invasive. So the legislature told the Census Bureau after the 2000 decennial census that they could no longer send out the long form. So that's why they gave birth to the American Community Survey around about 2005. And as a result, it causes some confusion because now we have to deal with the margin of error. And that's only because the survey is a survey. There's just a sample of the population out there. So anyway, there's some additional tricks that you need to be aware of in how to deal with that. So within the American Community Survey, there are actually 2 different current surveys. There used to be 3. They got rid of the 3-year. But the 1-year data set is only for populations over 65,000. So that could be a township, it could be a county, it doesn't matter. It has to be over 65,000 or it will not be in that 1-year data set. Everybody is in the 5-year data set, kind of. Because if you live in a tiny town like I do, of about 300 people, the likelihood of getting somebody within that tiny town in the survey is pretty next to nil. So what happens is you wind up getting an estimate of population, say, of 257, okay, when there's actually 300. But then you get a margin of error of 500. Well, you can't have negative population. So how do you interpret that? And basically what it means is you can't use that estimate because it's really not reliable. So if you ever have any questions on any of that, give me a call. I can walk you through it. The decennial census is just finished for 2020. That data will not be available until probably 2022. It's going to take some time to get all that information processed and get it published. The first data being published will be New Year's Eve this year, and that will go to the President of the United States, and that is in order to allocate how many, how the congressional seats are going to be allocated to the states. And then the states will get their data around about April of next year, in which case we're all going to be really busy drawing new districts because Illinois is actually losing 1 seat already in the House of Representatives, potentially losing a 2nd seat. And currently we're at 18, so that could put us down to 16. And in the news there's been an awful lot of talk about the Electoral College. And how do you determine how many votes each state gets in the Electoral College? How does that work? Well, it's the count of how many seats you have in the House of Representatives plus how many Senate seats, which every state has 2. So we had 18 in the House of Representatives, so that gave us 20. So next time around we may only have 18. So it's really important that everybody participates in the decennial census. I mean, much more so than anything else, because it determines so many other things that impacts our financial resources. So the third one I have listed here is the On the Map application, and it's marketed as a commuter database. Well, yeah, we're not really too concerned about commuters here, but it is really a handy data set in order to look at, because first of all, you can import your actual district boundaries in order to get aggregations for your district. So that's one big benefit. But beyond that, you can also take a look as to who it is that works within your district. Because when you think about it, all these surveys and stuff are based upon where you live, not on where you work. And so those districts that give in-district tuition rates to those who live within their district and also who work within the district, how do you know who those people are that work in your district? So this is the only data set that I'm aware of that gives you some of that information. And you can then export some of the economic information. It's got income, age, race, ethnicity, and a bunch of other different kinds of demographics. So it's an interesting data set to take a look at. Another great resource is the Illinois Department of Employment Security, or IDES. Now, all of their data is published either at the county level or at the WIA, which stands for the Workforce Innovation Act. You'll also see it as WIOA, W-I-O-A, which is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. So those two are used interchangeably. But that is where you would get the information on industry, occupation, wages, projections, unemployment, characteristics of the unemployed, which is going to become more popular now that we're in the COVID era. So the difference between industry and occupation: industry is what the company does, while occupation is what the people do. So you need to keep a beat on both of those as to what's taking place in your region. So I have the links here for those, as well as the definition of what those WIA regions actually are, which describes the map that you see on this slide. All right, hopefully everybody here is somewhat familiar with the Illinois State Board of Education. Now this is where you get all of those indicators coming from the high schools. And so with the State Board of Education, they have published the Illinois Interactive Report Card website, which is great. You can look at individual schools there. I think now they have a comparison capability as well. But if you need to download for several different schools, it's easier to just download their entire data set, which you find at this link that I put on this slide. And on the graphic on the right, you can see the last bullet point, the 2020 report card public data set. And that would give you all the information for all of the schools. So as long as you know the ID number for the high schools that you want to grab information for, you would just filter for those IDs and you'd have everything you would need. So, you know, some of that post-secondary data would include the high school performance indicators such as graduation rate, dropout rate. You can get the enrollment trends, low income trends, how many students are participating in CTE credits. Then 8th graders that are passing algebra as an indicator to show who's ready for math when they go into high school. And then the community college remediation rates has been out, I think 3 years now, might be 4 years with 2020. And that's really interesting to take a look at and see how many students are needing remediation after graduating from high school. The Illinois Student Assistance Commission, ISAC, collects all the information on financial aid. So this is where you're going to get information on how many students have applied for and how many students completed their FAFSA applications, as well as how many have applied for MAP data and how much was available to them in their awards. Pell data, you know, the same kind of information. And so the link is on here in order to gain access to those data sets to help you along. All right, now we're to IPUMS, which is my absolute favorite data set. Out of all the data sets that I work with, and there are many, IPUMS is definitely my favorite. Say, for example, you went to the census site and you wanted to find out how many Koreans are on food stamps. Well, you can download how many Koreans there are in your region, and you can download how many people are on food stamps, but you can't find out how many Koreans are on food stamps. And not all crosstabs are available at the census site because everything that they publish is predetermined tables. So what they have done is they're paying the University of Minnesota to publish the IPUMS data in freeform. So what that means is you can actually get these crosstabs at the individual household level that are then aggregated back up to what they call a PUMA region. Now PUMA regions are redrawn every 10 years based upon population, and they have to have at least 100,000 in population. And so you don't have to deal with the errors and stuff like that you get with the American Community Survey, although there are some caveats to that. And so if you get into IPUMS and you want to extract some data and you get lost and you're not sure how to interpret it, you can give me a call and I can help you out with that. But I have a couple examples here that I took out of the Harper Environmental Scan Report to give you an idea of what they look like. So one of the popular data sets is taking a look at opportunity youth within the region, and that's 18 to 24-year-olds that are not employed and they are not in school. So kind of looking at those as, hey, we need to get them engaged. And so you can look here and see in the Harper region that's about 2,000 folks within that age group. And then the graphic on the right shows the country of origin for all the foreign-born population that lives within the Harper region. And so it kind of gives you an idea globally, you know, where these folks are coming from. And there's a wealth of other information within that data set. It's all the same data that you would get through the American Community Survey or decennial census. And they have data going all the way back to 1890. So lots of fun stuff to look at there. Okay, I'm going to talk about Population Estimates Program. What this is part of the census as well, but it is different from the American Community Survey and the decennial. So technically, if you have a population over 65,000, you have a population number in the 1 year, you have a different population number in the 5 year, and then you have a third population number here in population estimates. So anyway, this is a great program. You say, why do we have, you know, 3 different numbers potentially? What this is, the population estimates is based upon administrative data only. So if you look at the graph, you can see they count births, deaths, international migration and domestic migration. So it's a little bit different in that the births and deaths come from the county level because they track all of that information. International and domestic migration are from other sources. Usually the tax returns, they can find out a lot of information, as well as county level data that they put into there. So this is much more accurate in that it's more sensitive to different changes in population. So when the 2013 came around, we started losing population. It took a couple years for the American Community Survey to recognize that we were losing population. They were still showing that the population was increasing. Population estimates had it declining in 2013. So they're going to pick up on more things that are happening much quicker than the American Community Survey, which is why if you're going to do projections of any type, this is the data set that you want to be using. So I gave the link there for it, and in the graph you can see, how things have changed. This is in the Harper region that we're looking at. So you can see in 2013 we were already losing on net in domestic migration, and that's really where Illinois is losing most of its people. And domestic migration just means that either they left this county for a different county, or they left the state for a different state, or went overseas, one of the two. So anyway, because we're losing population in Illinois, that's really where it is, because in 2014 you can see a much greater drop in net. The births are continuing to decline. People just aren't having as many kids or having any at all. And so there's not as many births, which contributes to population loss. And then you have deaths, that's going up only because there's more people in the upper age brackets because of the baby boomers. There's just more of them. So the death rate is definitely going up as well. International migration has been pretty much flatlined, except for the last couple of years. You can see, some declines there, and that's because of the visas. There were drastic changes to the visa programs for immigrants. So that definitely reduced there. But the biggest problem that Illinois has right now is the domestic migration. Public health data is not usually something that I would include in an environmental scan. However, due to COVID, that may change. So some institutions may want to take more of a proactive approach as far as what's taking place with public health, because it impacts everything else. If you've got a very vulnerable population, well, that's going to impact housing and, your population numbers, your components of population counts that we just showed. So it goes through the entire population, and so there may be some desire. So I wanted to give you some sources just in case you wanted to delve into it. Community Commons is great. Their whole focus is on public health. So you can get some demographic information, population data, stuff of that nature there as well. But they also have like these individual stories. They provide a lot of maps of the data. So it's a really rich data source to go through and take a look as to what you want to focus on. The second one here is the CDC, Center for Disease Control, Wonder database. And their Wonder database has all kinds of information from births to deaths to AIDS epidemics and, other. I'm certainly going to be throwing in COVID pretty soon. But it's pretty encompassing of everything that takes place out there as far as what people may get. There's cancer-related data, stuff of that nature. So there's a lot there. So I went ahead and included this particular graphic just to show how the births are declining, that's in the bright blue at the top, and the deaths are increasing. And it's expected that these two lines are going to converge at some point in Illinois. Yeah, this is Gas Buddy, which is a great little application to put on your smartphone. It's located at www.gasbuddy.com, and you can go ahead and download it directly. What this site does is it allows users to go ahead and create an account, and then you can update the gas prices at a gas station as you're filling up. That allows users to then go in and do searches to find out where the lowest prices may be in their area, which is really kind of a neat tool, not just for personal use, but also also for your institution. It's good to kind of keep an eye on what's going on with the gas prices, because obviously the higher the gas price, the shorter the distance they're going to be willing to travel to go to class. So here I've got the graph from 2010 all the way through 2019. You can see these huge spikes that started in 2010. Kind of a trivia question there as to why. That was when Deepwater Horizon blew and wreaked all kinds of havoc in the oil industry. So anyway, just keep that in mind. That happened in April of 2010. And so gas prices have come back down to more reasonable levels, but it doesn't take much to impact the oil industry, which then impacts all of us too. Okay, I'm including foreclosures in all of the data. The Woodstock Institute collects this information just for the Chicago metro area. So as you'll see in the graph, it's only Cook, DuPage, Kane, Lake, McHenry, and Will counties. However, back in 2008 when the housing bubble blew, you can see that there were really high foreclosure filings, and you can also download foreclosure completions. But anyway, with 2008, we've kind of recovered from that. You can see the numbers are way back down again, and figured that it was over and we don't really need to monitor foreclosures. However, now we're starting to get all kinds of news about people being evicted, and the foreclosures are back on the rise again because of COVID. So it might be a good thing to just kind of keep in mind, just in case you need to take a look, because anything that happens to people's housing greatly influences everything else, especially at our institutions. All right, that concludes our recorded session. So now we're going to switch over to the live session, and folks will be able to ask whatever questions you might have, and we can get a little bit further into the details on some of this stuff because we do have some time. Thank you.